Good evening. Hello, I'm Andy Agafangelo. I'm very proud to be the founder of the social enterprise known as Transparency Task Force. I set up the TTF back in 2015. We're just over 10 years old, and it's been a phenomenal journey of understanding and discovery. And I'm very afraid to say that one of the real learning points for me over the last 10 years is just how much harm, real serious harm, is being caused when people become victims of financial crime, scams, scandals, investment fraud, and that kind of thing, whether brought about as a consequence of regulatory failure or anything else. We're talking about stuff that really does hurt. And it would hurt anybody. It really would hurt anybody. And it would, of course, particularly hurt those who, at that point in time, are vulnerable. I emphasize the at point in time because one of the many things I've learned from our speaker tonight is that we shouldn't think of people being vulnerable, but we should think of people being in vulnerable situations. And I know that Lou is going to talk about the distinction between those two perspectives during our session tonight. But let me share with you a few thoughts of my own before passing over to Lou. I'm going to share my screen to help me to do that. And the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the FCA only because, as you can see here, the FCA has a very important role in many things. Its purpose is to regulate the conduct of around 42,000 businesses. Obviously, that's a phenomenally difficult job to do. They also have to prudentially supervise around 41,000 firms. The difference being between the two numbers being that they don't prudentially supervise those organizations that are deemed to be of systemic significance. And they also have various objectives given to them by government. And you'll see here what those objectives are. The first one listed is protecting consumers. There's a really interesting debate going on at the moment about what is the right level of protection. A tolerable level of harm. It's as if the regulatory environment is getting its head around the idea that we cannot get rid of all harms. Perhaps a tolerable level of harm is acceptable. You may have strong opinions about that, which you may or may not want to share during the course of tonight's session. Of course, there are many different types of people in the system when it goes wrong. One of those groups is the mortgage prison. I'm sharing right now a matter that was briefly discussed in TTF's advisory group meeting earlier today, the issue of mortgage prisoners. People are an important group in the sense that they are individuals who took out ordinary mortgages in ordinary circumstances, but unfortunately for them, the people that they borrowed money from, the lenders that they borrowed money from, were impacted by the global financial crisis. As a consequence of that global financial crisis, the mortgage was sold to typically unauthorized, unregulated private equity firms, often based in the US. As a consequence of that, they've been unable to shop around and move their mortgage from one place to another, hence mortgage prisoners. And many of these folks have been suffering huge amounts of harm. There's a wonderful campaign group called UK Mortgage Prisoners. We know them very, very well. If you speak to its members, you'll very, very quickly understand the amount of suffering being experienced as a direct consequence of them paying far, far more for their mortgage payments each month than would ordinarily be the case. And they have quite literally done nothing wrong. They just happen to be borrowing money from an entity that turned out to be an entity impacted adversely by the global financial crisis. I was at an event in Dublin about a year and a half ago, and one of the speakers, Trevor Needham, made a really interesting point. Um, he made the distinction between um, post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And what he basically said was, if let's say a soldier experiences or traumatic situation and as a consequence gets PTSD, that is obviously a very, very challenging situation. However, what makes it more difficult in some ways for individuals who are victims of financial crime or scandals is that they're not dealing with an incident that left them traumatized. They are dealing with an ongoing situation that is traumatic. We know quite a bit about this topic. About a month ago, I'm proud to have led a summit in Parliament about HMRC's egregious treatment of investment scandal victims. A very well attended event. We had the Victims Commissioner there. And without a doubt, not only do these situations cause individuals to suffer a great degree of harm and suffering, it's an ongoing situation. As some of the people who spoke about events spoke about the idea of taking their own lives as a consequence of what they've experienced. We have Paul Weir with us tonight from EMAG. That's the Equitable Members Action Group, the Equitable Life Group members. About a year and a bit ago, Paul and I were walking the streets of London with about 100 other people. Amongst other things, we were carrying a coffin. The coffin was with us to represent the people who were experiencing a very traumatic time as a consequence of losing life-changing amounts of money. Not only is there the financial impact, but there's also the psychological impact as well. And in very, very broad terms, Transparency Task Force and the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Investment Fraud and Fair Financial Services, both entities are very much of the view that more could and should be done to try to protect consumers who are going through a period of vulnerability, whether that's a short-term period of time or a long-term period of time. I'm going to ask you to thank our speaker tonight in just a moment. But before I do, you'll see on the screen behind me, that way, we've got the Punter Southall Analytics logo up there. Some of you attended the 10-year anniversary meeting of TTF back on the 6th of May. And one of the ideas that came from that meeting when we were reflecting on TTF's first 10 years was how can we change our model so that we're more likely to survive financially. And as a consequence of that meeting and the conversations that happened since, we've reached out to some organisations who know us well and invited them to financially support us. I'm very pleased to say that the first such organisation is Punter Southall Analytics. You can Google them if you want to know more about what they do, but it's basically quantifying detriment and loss. They work with law firms and help with things like class actions and that kind of thing. So I thought I would explain why the Punter Southall Analytics logo is there. We are very keen to engage with other organisations who are or that are authentically aligned with the TTF mission, who want to support us financially, because if we don't survive, we can't do what we do. So priority number one, TTF must survive. The question is, how can we do that? How can we raise funds and so on and so forth? So it's a very, very long issue. So from my point of view, tonight's topic is phenomenally important. I'll chip into the conversation as we go, no doubt. And of course, folks, if you want to do so, please do. Chip in via the chat, raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Our speaker tonight, Lou Baxter-Scott, I've said this publicly on so many occasions. I hope I don't embarrass Lou by doing it now. In the 10 years that I've been doing this, I've not come across anybody more committed to helping people than Lou. I'm always very impressed with her work. She has a forthright approach. She speaks her mind. She's a strong person with strong and very well-founded views. Lou played a very important part in the reports about the FCA that the All-Party Parliamentary Group put together. Lou was one of the members of the recommendations panel. I'm very pleased to say that John Howard, the chair of TTF Advisory Group, was also on that panel, and John's with us tonight too. Lou's also a member of the Secretariat, the APPG, plays a phenomenally important part in my thinking, particularly around issues of consumer protection and vulnerable people. I hope that sets the scene. We'll be wrapping up at or by 7:30. We'll try to make this as interactive a session as we can, so please feel free to make good use of the chat with comments and questions and challenges, whatever you wish. But I'm really pleased that we've got Lou with us tonight, and can we please show our appreciation to her taking time out to talk about this very, very important topic, consumer vulnerability and how best to support it. Lou, over to you to take the conversation wherever you'd like to. Thank you so much for being with tonight, Lou. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, as ever. I like coming to these meetings. You got me out. I was supposed to be playing stall ball tonight. For those of you that live in Sussex, it's like cricket rounders. But I'm going to be running to this as soon as running to my stall ball game as soon as this is finished. So thank you for that introduction. It was very kind. I do speak my mind. I try to speak up for the people that can't speak up for themselves. That's sort of my passion in relation to this stuff. I'm going to start the session. So it's on consumer vulnerability. So the Financial Conduct Authority currently found that 47% of UK consumers currently show one or more characteristic of potential vulnerability. And that's based on their health, financial resilience and capability, and on life events that could be having a detrimental impact on them. So that's potentially over 25 million people. The latest research, which actually highlights that we think this is closer to about 67% of the whole adult population has a characteristic or is living in some sort of situational vulnerability. So my first question to you, and you can either shout at me or put it in the chat, is what does consumer vulnerability look like to you? What do you think makes people vulnerable? Life events. Thank you, David. Ignorance.
When people feel emotionally challenged because the circumstances they're in, nothing.
Yep. Understanding of their rights, lots of things. Struggling financially, they're probably made vulnerable, just the anxiety, illness, uncertainty, intimidated by authority. That's a big one, actually, which is one that's a hidden one. Suffering an unexpected financial loss. Yeah. The lack of understanding of complicated terms and conditions, in particular interest rate calculations. Has anybody heard of the plain numbers theory, the plain numbers method? This is how we need to communicate numbers. I can send you some guidance that I've got on this as well. It's how we should be communicating numbers effectively to people, particularly things around interest rates. There's really good practice around how we should be trying to ensure that how we talk about that stuff is inclusive for everybody, particularly those people that are potentially neurodiverse, to ensure that we capture all of those people and provide inclusive language. So I can share some of that after the meeting as well. I only learned about it last week. It's very exciting, something new for me to learn about, which is great. Lack of support, loneliness, knowing your rights but not getting any redress, complaints procedures, and ombudsman a waste of time. Okay, so there's a couple of things from this. The current state of play is that the Competitions and Markets Authority reported that consumers are losing £72 billion a year to their inability to be able to access redress. This is not just the consumer's responsibility. This is the fact that accessing redress is bloody impossible from a consumer perspective. Companies and organisations make it really difficult to do so. I'm not talking about the not-for-profit ombudsman. I'm talking about the initial business or organisation that you're dealing with. We've moved from a world of you can't phone people, you have to email, you don't get a response on the email. What if you can't write properly? What if you're not digitally sound? How do you access this redress? So people are giving up because it's too difficult to do it, which is causing that increase in detriment, or people don't know that they are entitled to get any money back, so they don't even bother trying. These are the two things that we're seeing. So if you take the consumer detriment, which will include a load of fraud and scams in it, because people will buy things that aren't what they say that they are, or they'll be counterfeit, or they'll never be delivered, which is also fraud. We need to be aware of that. Counterfeit goods, also fraud. Unsafe goods, also fraud. So from a trading standards perspective, we're not just talking about, so the fraud statistics are £10 billion a year. The detriment to not being able to access redress on undelivered or unsatisfactory goods is 72 billion. So the fraud statistics are gravely underreported, as we thought. And that figure is gravely underestimated from a consumer perspective and a business perspective as well. So those things that make you vulnerable. I'm just going to read you the dictionary definition of vulnerability, which currently the Collins Dictionary definition says someone who is weak and without protection, with the result they are easily physically or emotionally harmed. Old people are often particularly vulnerable members of society. So we're still in a world where we pinpoint people as being vulnerable just for something very simple as age. So the way I like to think about vulnerability is that it's a state, not a trait. So we move in and out of those periods of vulnerability. As Andy said at the beginning, there's two sort of broad brush types of vulnerability: situational or marketplace vulnerability. So it's what's going on around you that causes you to be vulnerable, or the marketplace that you're trying to engage with that causes that vulnerability. All of these things, and the way that the world currently is with the cost of living crisis, the political instability, the wars, the fact that we've moved into a digital world and people haven't been trained how to work out how to work in a digital world, are causing this storm of vulnerability, which means we're all more susceptible to fraud and scams, all far more susceptible to fraud and scams. The problem that we have a lot with the fact that we're all more susceptible to it, we have a lot of cognitive bias where we don't think it's going to happen to us. So we don't do the things to self-protect. So we need to do more to get people talking about the fact that they didn't get their money back. They bought something that wasn't right. They were defrauded. They were a victim of scams, to ensure that we highlight the fact that this happens to everybody. My mum got scammed again last week. This is like, she got scammed at the beginning of the year. She's been scammed again this week. She clicked on a Facebook advert, bought some things on Facebook via a dodgy website who sent her a thank you card for the £48 she spent on their website. So again, because my mum is now, she has been scammed quite a few times. She's on a suckers list. She's being targeted. She's also aware of it now. She's like, I don't know why I was thinking that. I was like, you're probably tired, or you just didn't think about it at the time. Or again, there's a lot of things that happen. That's situational vulnerability, depending on what's happening at the time. Okay, so have there ever been times in your life, situations in your lives, your personal lives, and only share what you're happy to share, where you felt more vulnerable?
I don't mind telling you this, Luke. The most vulnerable I've ever felt is when it was midnight in the Bronx and I couldn't find my Airbnb, and I got very scared very quickly walking up and down the Bronx. And at one point, I got so scared, I just got out of there and headed back to a different part of New York. I felt physically threatened and very scared. It was horrible experience. I felt completely vulnerable. And what made it worse was I was carrying a shiny suitcase, a laptop, and I was wearing a suit walking up and down the Bronx. And these two young police officers said, "What the hell are you doing here? Get out of here." It's a horrible feeling very scared. Normally, I feel very confident and quite kind of outspoken. I felt completely and utterly timid and out of my depth and almost childlike in my state of absolute fear. I'll never forget them.
Thank you for sharing that. It's that would make the most of us feel vulnerable, I think, as well. In the chat, we've got bereavement, relationship breakdowns, domestic abuse, grieving of a close relative, vulnerability, all elderly, newly widowed, no mortgage savings identified. Yeah. So again, we know that the criminals will have done things in the past. We know they've like combed the obituaries to find out people that are recently bereaved, to then be able to target those people at their lowest ebb. I met a recent scam victim who had lost his wife, and then the criminals had literally targeted him, and he'd then passported £85,000 to them as part of a romance fraud. Because again, there's that situational vulnerability and that bereavement. And he knew that all of the stuff. When I met him, he was like, no, I wouldn't ever do that again. He said, at the time, though, I just lost my wife. He'd lost his wife to a heart attack. Cancer, hard of hearing, limited computing abilities, old age, trying to deal with the Financial Ombudsman Service. Okay, I agree with those things as well. The other thing that somebody wrote earlier is reading ages. So the average UK consumer reading age is between 9 and 12. So we should be writing things for 9-year-olds to ensure that everybody understands it. If you ask most of the population what an APR is, they won't know. They also won't. If you went and did a poll and said, what does inflation mean? They'll go, I don't know, but things are costing me more money. People don't understand the terminology we use. We have a huge amount of assumed knowledge, which means that we're then expecting people to highlight the fact that they don't understand the information that we're providing. Nobody wants to do that. Only 17% of people that are actually living with vulnerability will self-refer and identify themselves and highlight the fact that they are vulnerable. Everybody else doesn't, because they don't want to. There's shame about it. We're too British. British culture means we don't talk about money. We don't talk about vulnerability. We're not allowed to do that. That's not what we're allowed to do. So it's something that we need to shift and change and make it more acceptable to talk about. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see these statistics here? This is a current snapshot of vulnerability in the UK. So there's 9.8 million people living with a disability. Now, that disability doesn't mean they are vulnerable. It depends on what they're trying to do, or where they are in their disability journey, or what other situations going on around them. There's 944,000 people living with dementia and their carers, and being a carer has more recently been highlighted as well as something that causes potential situational vulnerability. That's going to be 1.6 million by 2050. And that's as well because we're diagnosing it easier and understanding it more. 1 in 6 adults experience a common mental health disorder like depression or anxiety in the last week. Now, mental health is a really complicated one as well, because every UK consumer, adult consumer, experiences on average 1 to 4 periods of mental health in the course of a year. Now, if you're trying to make a big decision that could cause a period of mental health, or the mental health, or you could be trying to, you could be in a period of mental health and then having to make a big decision. For example, we've seen an increase in imposter fraud and scams where people's money's being intercepted going to solicitors in relation to selling houses. We've seen quite a big influx in those imposter type scams because they are clever and they're plausible. This isn't like before. Historically, people think about scams as you give me £1, I'll give you 75 million. These are not. These are imposter scams where they are looking like the emails are coming from the solicitor. You're putting the money into the account that you've been asked to put the money into, and the money is being whisked away because it's not the right account. 23% of us suffer anxiety when dealing with service providers. Again, it brings it back to redress and being able to access redress and get your money back. Some people won't even report the fact they've been defrauded to their banks because there's too much anxiety dealing with the bank. 1 in 7 of us have some form of neurodiversity. And I'll talk a little bit more about neurodiversity as well. We've recently done a piece of research within the scams team, which says that if you are neurodiverse, you are 50%, so double, more susceptible to fraud and scams. You're 50% more likely to be a victim of fraud and scams than somebody who is neurotypical. The other piece of research that we've done is that you are far more likely to be a victim of fraud and scams if you have low levels of financial literacy as well. So we need to do more to teach children and adults financial literacy. If we've got a huge amount of the population, adult population, not being financially literate, who's teaching their children to be financially literate? It brings me back to language around APR and interest rates, and how my mum taught me how to bounce a credit card when I was 18 on an interest only. But again, if you don't have parents that can teach you these things, how do you ever learn how to budget, or what is real or what isn't, or the value of money? Moving everybody around so I can see the slides. 3 million people are living with cancer. That's going on the up by 2040. That's going to be 5.3. And again, that can cause insane amounts of situational vulnerability. And 80,000 people were divorcing in 2022. I mean, that was the year after the lockdown. The figure before that was a lot higher. The lockdown figure was quite high for people getting divorced, but also moving house and people being bereaved. So deaths in the UK, leaving millions coping with bereavement. Those are things that cause situational vulnerability. As I talked about before, so the things that cause your situational vulnerability are health, life events, resilience, capability, that low ability to withstand financial shock. I think somebody mentioned it in the chat as well. And your circumstances, again, are you older? Are you young? If you're under 25, the front part of your brain has not been formed properly, which is why younger people like roller coasters and horror films. And when you get older, you don't like those sort of things as much because you've got the fear factors and the wires are all connected properly. So again, younger people are more likely to take risks that older people may not take. Organisational blind spots, this is key. So for any organisations that you work with or talk to, there's loads of organisational blind spots around key things, key vulnerability, which causes that exclusion by accident. So this training I deliver this training for lots of organisations. It's not a one-hit wonder. You need to keep reviewing it. You need to listen to the complaints from people. The people that have experienced vulnerability are the experts by experience, and they should be brought around the table and they should be asked, what did you find difficult about accessing our organisation? How could we help you more? The people that complain are the people that we should be listening to the most, because those are the people that would help us plug the spots where we're missing things, because we can't possibly, there's no such thing as a truly inclusive service. I'm not naive. Ideally, I'd like to think that there would be eventually, but there isn't. So we are going to miss people by accident, but then that's why we need to continually review it and plug those gaps, which is what the current Financial Conduct Authority are saying that financial organisations need to do in relation to their treatment of consumers under the Consumer Duty, because they are missing people. And it's a tick box. And it needs to be more than just a tick box. It needs to be embedded into that culture of each financial organisation to ensure that everybody's being supported to get what they need at the right time. Vulnerability is not static, as I've said. We move in and out of periods of it. What you need right now is completely different to what you might need tomorrow or what you might need in 6 months' time. So again, we need to continually track it and look at the trends. The latest trends are talking about people that are living rental accommodation. Their rents have been increased. They are one of our most vulnerable groups. People that are solo sufferers, so single parents, single carers. Those people are potentially more vulnerable than we've known it before, because again of the cost of living crisis. People under 25, again, they are seen to be one of the most vulnerable because they were really massively affected by lockdown. The mental health impact on younger people during the lockdowns was quite extreme. So again, there's some situational vulnerability coming out there. So again, it changes depending on where we are and what we're doing. So it's important we keep on top of it. I'll send you out a report as well, Andy, that I've got around this about the latest trends. Right, so in your organisations you work for or organisations that you know, what do you think the organisational blind spots could be?
Lou, we know about the FCA, you know, a great deal about the FCA. Obviously, there's nobody here from the FCA to speak for themselves, so I won't be too sort of harsh, as it were, but I'm pretty sure the FCA don't really, I think the FCA don't take time to understand the consequence of some of their decisions. For example, there's a recent matter where lots of individuals lost money as a consequence of many things, including a bit of a regulatory failure by the FCA. The matter got looked at by the Financial Regulators Complaints Commissioner, who recommended the FCA should pay compensation to the victims. But the FCA basically said, no, we're not going to. I would say the FCA has got a blind spot to the emotional as well as financial impact of the decisions that they make, which affect huge amounts of people who feel disenfranchised, unable to speak up. It's exactly what you said earlier. People feeling that they cannot have their voices heard. And when organisations are out of touch with that, I think that they lose an opportunity to really understand the impact they're having in the world. That's just what springs to mind.
I agree with all of that. We've got lack of awareness of other business areas and how they can support. Takes people ages to respond. Complaints procedures are made intentionally complex. I completely agree with that. Ombudsmen take 12 weeks plus to respond. Even when formally complaining, you do not get full names and job titles. The ombudsman system at the moment is overrun. I work for a couple of ombudsmen, so I'm just declaring an interest, and they are some of them are very good and do the best with what they can do. But again, it's this lack of understanding as well of what an ombudsman can actually do and how far they can get involved from a consumer perspective. And the time delays are unacceptable. But I do think there's something around management of those expectations. If it's going to take 40 weeks, you should be told that at the beginning so that you know that. And I don't think that that's always the case. I don't think people have their expectations managed properly from a complaints perspective. I really don't. It's really quite painful. Okay, so question for everybody again. So what things do we think would be affecting vulnerability in 2025? Specifically now, what new things are affecting vulnerability? Working age people who do not appreciate difficulties arising as customers use age. They don't. The digital exclusion. I think it's there's still something like 75% of over 75s aren't on Wi-Fi at home. Poor regulation attracts wrongers into financial services. AI now, Andy, that's a really interesting one. I'm doing the Chartered Trading Standards Institute plenary on AI and the risks and the benefits of it next week. Now, I'm not going to lie, it's not my area of expertise. I know a little bit. But my stance is going to be the criminals don't actually need to use AI to scam people. The traditional old school scams that have always been around are still around and still the same. I did some research on it this morning and actually, 87% of people in vulnerable circumstances have experienced financial harm. And they were saying that something like 10% of that or something was linked to AI, because it's particularly older people, they're still targeted by phones and texts. So it's not a case of that we're seeing AI really targeting people. Yes, there are some deep fake romance frauds and there are some AI generated chatbots that are phoning people. Yes, there absolutely are. I think it's making it easier. But if you actually think about that, that's just an old school phone call that's still working. From a criminal perspective, it's not actually really clever AI tech that is actually targeting consumers. It's the same methods that the criminals have always used because the same methods still work, unfortunately. I'm still seeing incidents of like old school doorstep crime all the time. People going and doing people's roofs by knocking on the door. Right, okay, so in the chat, we've also got, in the case of the FDA, there are conflicting interests with what the government wants. It's a very fundamental point. Industry success is not far in meaning from making lots of profits at the expense of the customers. Social media, absolutely. They are saying that social media and our smart devices have decreased our IQ by 10 points, and we have completely and utterly lost the art of paying attention. This is what the latest research is saying on that, because we're just picking up constantly. Picking up your phone. We've lost the art of thinking. We've lost the art of conversation. and we've lost the art of actually paying attention for long periods of time. And our children are being brought up on these devices. I'm in the fortunate camp that I didn't get one till I was 20. So I was brought up in a world where I had to use my brain and my imagination and like climb trees and stuff. Whereas now kids have just got all the tech all of the time. New government and the shift in policy, the continuing shift in policy. It's not static, it's changing all the time. The turnaround today on the winter fuel allowance, which was taken away, now it's been brought back. There's a lot of political instability. So people are very worried about that from a vulnerability perspective as well. Cuts to basic benefits. Yep, the new PIP assessment now. So it used to be disability living allowance until you're 19. It's now PIP at 16, and everybody is having their assessments re-looked at to see whether or not they are eligible or not for that assessment. So people living with long-term disabilities are potentially not going to qualify for their benefits any longer, which is going to see a huge amounts of vulnerability for those people. Fear of war, Trump, don't get me started on Trump. It's not the place for me to share my own political views on that one. Disinformation and misinformation. We are not media literate. We are not digitally literate. We are not consumer literate. So all of that disinformation, misinformation, I sit on an Ofcom panel that deals with that stuff. The online harms bill that came in is supposed to help with law enforcement and help to ensure that the information that is spat out at us continuously is actually factual and correct. I'm not sure how well that's going to be enforced yet. Ofcom's got to step up and do some work in relation to that space. So we're waiting to see at the moment. We've also got a new piece of legislation, which is the digital markets piece of legislation that's come in, which allows trading standards, not yet, but will allow trading standards to tackle fake reviews. Because we know that from a consumer perspective, the one thing we do rely on when we're looking to buy something is other consumers' opinions. And if those are fake, how can we possibly rely on those? And a lot of people wouldn't even know that they could be fake, again, because of that misinformation, disinformation. Lack of government resource to pay for what they'd like to pay for. Spending cuts leads to harm. The spending review will lead to vulnerability. Yes, it will. Absolutely. I battled for 6 years. I eventually got the £6,000 I lost as opposed to the £400 they offered me 3 years in the process. They were in effect acting as a defence counsel from the company who took my money. Again, if you didn't have the wherewithal to fight or the resilience to be able to fight for that, that causes that vulnerability as well, and that unfairness of the situations. The AI developers as well, there are going to be, now we've got some things in coming down the track that are going to be really positive where consumers can actually use it to see whether or not things are legitimate or not. But how are we going to ensure that people know how to use it? And people are going to be fearful of it. People are really fearful of AI, not just from a usability perspective, but people think they're not going to have a job. The only people that aren't going, I'm not worried about this, are barbers, I think, because barbers will always have a job unless we get robots. So it's, again, people are concerned that the technology is going to surpass them and they're not going to be needed anymore. Social media, social engineering, Russia. If anybody hasn't, there's a great book, I've got it here. There's a great book called Somebody Told Me by Danny Wallace. It's a big green book and it's brilliant. And it's about social media and the dangers of it. It's a really easy read as well, but it gives you a bit more of an educational level about what we're seeing, why we're seeing it, and the troll farms in Russia. That Russia have farms and farms and farms of people targeting the UK with misinformation to ensure, if you look at the Chinese TikTok, so Chinese TikTok is all educational. They don't allow like a funny dog video. It's not allowed in China. We're just killing our brains by watching like funny sheep noises and dog videos. I mean, I can do this, by the way. I can doom scroll till the cows come home. But in China, that doesn't happen. Those people are only being shown different things. They're educational videos to upskill themselves. So again, the misinformation and the stuff that's been chucked at us is deliberately been chucked at us as well. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. If you read the book, it's evidence-based. So on the Mortgage Prisoners Fund, Dominic Lindley is doing a good job trying to help. Couple bits here, 40 months to ignore our complaints again. And there's the book. Thank you, Andy. So again, it's not all doom and gloom, because there are things that we can do to ensure that we support all consumers. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to reframe this situation. If we can reframe vulnerability as providing an inclusive service, then what we'll do is scoop up all of that vulnerability and not expect people to out themselves, self-declare, highlight any vulnerabilities and be in that embarrassing situation. So we need to, sorry, one of my kids come down the stairs and my dog's going mad. So we need to highlight that it's all right to be vulnerable, but also that it's really important that we continually review whatever we're doing, whatever we're providing, to make sure that it's inclusive. I'm just going to share my slides again and show you. Okay, so from a mental health perspective, that's already been raised as well as something that causes that vulnerability. The NHS are coining it a mental health pandemic. It's something like 15 million people are on waiting lists for mental health support, and that inability to be able to access it. And 1.5 million of those are under 19s. So those are our adults of the future. So again, they were disproportionately affected by COVID. Okay, there's some statistics, but I can share these slides with people afterwards as well. So also, the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be affected by mental health as well. So the two things correlate. Question, are older people vulnerable?
Lou, if I can just chip in with a quick comment on that. One of the groups we are trying to help, the APPG and TTF, are the victims of the Philips Trust scandal. There's some focus about that, Gordon and Lynn. These were typically very elderly people who walked into their building societies one day, people who trusted their building societies, and unfortunately got introduced to what turned out to be bogus will writing firms and all the rest of it. What's particularly sad about it is when you talk to the victims, they trusted the building societies who gave the introductions, and that it's a horrible thought in a way, but sometimes being trusting leaves you open to vulnerability. And I do think a certain old school type of person who is particularly vulnerable to that because they've got old school values and they just don't expect to be ripped off by organisations they've spent years learning to trust, like the local building society. So that kind of intersection, a supposedly trustworthy organisation turning out to be untrustworthy is particularly harmful. Maybe Gordon and or Lynn might want to speak on that point later. Thank you.
I think that it's old school as well in relation to we have it like with Royal Mail, for example. So when I dealt with we deal with telephone scams quite a lot, but also in relation to mail scams, what we would see is that people would believe the letters they were receiving because they were delivered by Royal Mail and they trusted their postman because they'd see their postman every day. That's a long-term relationship. So there's a trust there. Like if somebody phones from the bank or the water board still, or even though the water board doesn't exist anymore, or a gas board, people believe that. Or I'm from the council, I'm in the area, can I just come in and check something and then get distraction burglary? So there is that element of trust, but also they're not Googling everything like we are, because they're not on the internet a lot of the time. And there is that element of trust. And also being older doesn't make you more vulnerable, but it does come with some conditions that can cause vulnerability, such as cognitive decline, such as less mobility, such as that confidence and things. Like I know my mum doesn't like driving in the dark. Like she was used to driving in the dark, now she doesn't like driving in the dark because there's that vulnerability about driving in the dark. She might not be able to see as well, or she's scared. So again, it's all those things, isn't it? And that position of trust, it's easier to we call it what it is. It's abuse, it's coerce, it's control, it's grooming, it's abuse of older people. And those criminals, it's easier to push those older people sometimes into that hot state and push them into a position where they can be coerced, controlled, groomed, and moved and manipulated to do what the criminals want them to do. Gordon, everyone is vulnerable, I think. I like that. I agree with that. Depending on what you're doing or what the situation is, I like that. Right. Okay. So the answer is maybe But the answer is there are additional things that can affect older people when they're making the decisions. What you'll often find is their cognitive abilities slow down. So they may have greater knowledge, but they'll take a longer time to make those decisions. If they're being forced or pressurized by a criminal, long-term objective decisions. The criminals know, so that we then don't react as we would had we just been chatting now and it was a cold state. It's deliberately done. Okay, the next one. I'm just going to show you the next slide. So neurodiversity as well. So this is something that I chair something called the SCAMS Team Research Innovation Collaboration Task Force. It's called STRICT. So it was set up specifically to look at the similarities between domestic abuse and fraud and scams, particularly moving into economic abuse as well, because we're seeing a lot more economic abuse from marriages, relationships, one partner financially abusing the other partner. And the first piece of research was to map across why we victim blame and shame in both those areas. Why did you fall for that? Why were you so stupid? Oh, that sort of thing doesn't happen to people like you. Or why didn't you leave? All of that stuff. We use we put the heat on the feet of the victim rather than the criminal. And also the criminal tactics, which in a domestic abuse situation, coercive, controlling, grooming, manipulation, are very similar to fraud and scams relationships, coercive, controlling, grooming, manipulation. So again, but we still put the heat on the feet of the victims. So what we did was we did this piece of research, and we've learned across from domestic abuse and some of the things that they do really well to support their victims. And we've also reflected back to try and support them and support some of the things they're doing with domestic abuse victims. And we came up with this no blame, no shame campaign. And this really creative training, which brings in things like, and people have mentioned it as well already today, the fact that this isn't just, oh, silly me, I've lost some money. There is PTSD involved in this, post-traumatic distress disorder. So I don't like to use acronyms. We need to use a trauma-informed response when we're supporting our victims. We need to use cognitive behaviour therapy to ensure that we're providing the right support and the right victim support. It's not trivial, it's not silly. If somebody was mugged on the road, you wouldn't go, oh, you fell for a mugging. We would never say that to somebody like that. And that person would be provided with victim support and police support. And we don't provide the same to fraud and scam victims, and we need to. So that piece of research came from that group. And if I do research, I like to have an and what. So if I prove something, there's no point going, oh, that was nice, we proved that. We need to do something about it. So we've moved the group on slightly and changed the terms of reference and the membership to a wider membership. And this year we've carried out a piece of research that was around neurodiversity. And if you are neurodiverse, and the report will be coming up soon, and I'll share it with Andy. It says you are 50% more likely to be a victim of fraud or scams. It also highlighted the fact that people that are neurodiverse have a false confidence in thinking they can identify fraud and scams, which is leading them into being more likely to respond. From a personal experience, my Bertie, who is upstairs, you can probably hear him, he's shouting, he's autistic. He has this false sense of he knows right. Even with, I'm his mum, I'm head of the scams team, but he knows more about scams than I do. And I keep going, this is what I do for my job all of the time. But if he sees something on, say, like TikTok, for example, and it's a football shirt, and he has to pay £30 and he gets a surprise football shirt, he's convinced he is going to get the best football shirt. And he lacks in impulse control. So he would make that decision very quickly and buy one for £30 and then end up with like Accrington Stanley or something similar to that, not the Liverpool shirt he was hoping to get. So it's again, we need to learn more about the different neurodiversities, which could be autistic spectrum disorder, it could be developmental language, it could be dyspraxia, could be dyslexia, it could be attention deficit as well, highlights itself in different ways. It could be inattention, it could be lack of impulse control, it could be all sorts of things. So again, we need to be careful. This is a broad brush. Neurodiversity is very broad, and we need to ensure that just because somebody has autistic spectrum disorder or ADHD, they might not need the same thing. So we need to be really aware of that as well, but also aware that these people are more likely and more susceptible to fraud and scams. And 1 in 7 of us has some type of neurodiversity. So I'm in the process of working out what we're going to do about this, how we're going to better support those people. Have we got the messaging right, diverse or not? I don't know yet, because I'm only in the early stages. I've got the findings, and now we can move that on to see how we can better support all of those people, because it's a big task. It's a big task in that one. But again, we will be bringing in experts by experience. I run a lot of my my writing past Bertie. If he can understand it and read it back to me in his own words and explain to me what he thinks I mean, then I'm going to be writing something that's inclusive for everybody. Everybody's going to understand it. I probably said this before. I run a company called Consumer Friend, and Floss has also got some neuro tweaks, shall we say. She's my 15-year-old daughter, and she thought that my company was you eat your friend. So it was consume your friend, not consumer friend. She thought it was an A rather than an ER. So again, it's that literal interpretation. We don't know what people are thinking unless we ask them and they actually tell us the truth. So it's really important that we consider all these different people and what they may need. It's also very typical, if you've got one neurodiversity, you're 75% likely to have another one as well. So quite often you'll see attention deficit also comes with dyslexia or dyspraxia or Erland syndrome or something else. Some other neurodiversity will come with that. So again, not one shoe does not fit all when we talk about neurodiversity. But again, I'm happy to talk to anybody about that, because as you can probably tell, I love it. I find it really fascinating. We always need to communicate in plain English. We're not very good at that. It should be understood on the first time that somebody reads it or somebody hears it. We are particularly bad in this country and culturally at talking in really big words to make ourselves sound clever. And what we then tend to do with that is we then exclude half the room, because people generally don't like to go, don't know what that means, I don't understand that word. So we really need to strip back the language that we use and make it far more simple and speak and write like it's for 9 to 12-year-olds. And if we can't do that, you can stick it into ChatGPT and go rewrite this for 9 to 12-year-olds, which is what I quite often do. There's also some really useful tools on Word where you can go into insights on Word, which is free, and it tells you what the reading age of the document that you've written is. So again, you can then adjust the document to ensure that it's inclusive and supports everybody. Okay.
While we're waiting for Lou to come back, let me just share my screen. I want to draw your attention to a couple of things. I'm just filling in whilst Lou is reconnecting with us, okay? This item I'm showing you right now, you may have heard me talk about it before. It's the research paper that TTF produced 3 years ago. As you can see, we called it Faces of Financial Crime. And it's basically a collection of 22 case studies of individuals who lost significant amounts of money through financial scams of one kind or another. And I just want to draw your attention to a couple of images. We try to use images to portray particular narratives. And there's one that I think is really significant. And it's this one here. Can you see the chap who's got his head in his hands and presumably his wife is looking over him quite angry and quite cross? The reason I'm drawing your attention to that particular one, this one here, is because I'm aware that there are some people who've been scammed, typically a male who has lost either all or a significant part of his life savings, typically his pension fund, and is carrying a huge burden daily because he hasn't yet told his other wife, his partner, that it has happened. I spoke about complex PTSD earlier. Can you imagine the state of mind of, let's simplify this, typically the breadwinner, I'm using old-fashioned language here, forgive me doing that, the person who's built up the family's financial security, who in their, let's say, 50s, maybe in their 60s, has it scammed away, has got nobody to turn to, and is feeling so shocked about the situation that he hasn't yet found the courage, if that's the right word, I'm not sure it is actually, found the courage or the opportunity to tell his partner, his wife. I actually know people who are in that situation. I can't think of anything worse. Knowing that it's going to, at some point in time, come to the surface. Some of you also know the story of Ian Davis, rest in peace, who took his own life, one of our volunteers. Some of you know that story very well because you knew him. Lost his entire life savings as he was approaching retirement. Complete shock, complete meltdown. And I'm aware that there are people on the Zoom session tonight who can really directly relate to the issues that we've been talking about. I think Lou's done an absolutely brilliant job kind of talking us through the numbers and the statistics and all the rest of it. But it really has been quite traumatic. While we're waiting for Lou to rejoin us, I'm going to invite Steve Conley in a minute, if he doesn't mind, just to talk about the work that he's been doing with a small cohort of TTF members, helping them to kind of restore a sense of trust and confidence and hope for the future. Steve, if you can speak to that in a few minutes' time. Well, while we're waiting for Lou to return and while Steve's getting his thoughts gathered about that particular point, please do raise your hand if you'd like to come in and share any thoughts. Can I go to Ian Duffield? Because I can always rely on Ian to have an opinion about something. He's absolutely fantastic member of the TTF community for many reasons, including that one. Ian, you're a tough guy. Yeah, you're a tough guy. But even somebody like you must feel pretty damn down from time to time in relation to what's happened in your cases and the many other cases like it. Ian, anything you'd like to share reflecting on tonight's conversation so far?
Yeah, I think I think in my case, Andy, you're aware of the numbers, and I've never been shy about stating them because it's embarrassing. And for those of you who don't know me or have heard me speak, I was responsible for investing my wife's and I joint savings. Significant amount of it was my personal pensions, but my wife and I, from the day we got married, treated everything as joint income, joint responsibility, house in joint names, everything, and we both had our individual roles to play. But on the financial side, fundamentally, it was me who made the decisions, and I invested in the Woodford Equity Income Fund to a considerable degree, believing it to be protected by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, because both Woodford and the FCA said this fund is protected by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. Who am I not to trust a government department, the Financial Conduct Authority? And when the dust had settled after the collapse of Woodford Equity Income Fund, my wife and I had lost at the outset £214,000. Eventually, that ended up at £100,000 after all the distributions were made by the Equity Income Fund. By any stretch of the imagination, that is a significant sum of money. I felt embarrassed, I felt guilty, I felt depressed, I felt upset, and generally regarded myself as a person, as Andy said, with particularly strong mind, and absolutely shocked at what had happened, and look back and then start asking myself, where did I go wrong? Because I made the decision. Inevitably, I had to convince myself, and did convince myself, I had done nothing wrong. Right? I believed the financial press, who said that Woodford was, and I quote their headline on one of their articles, the man who cannot stop making money. I believe the FCA because they were the Financial Conduct Authority, and they said that my money was protected up to roughly £80,000 per person. So when I look back at the risk that I took, everything said this is a low risk operation. Yes, we know the markets can rise and fall and you can have financial crashes, but generally, if you can then sit and wait for the market to come back, you're not at great risk of losing significant amounts of your money. And it's that belief in saying, looking at what happened and looking at how I could have acted differently and having to come to terms with the fact that I made that decision. And I believe I've persuaded myself eventually, after a lot of guilt, second doubting myself, that I did nothing wrong. But what happened, I was let down by people who scammed me. Woodford certainly did, because he was not truthful about what he was doing with the investments. The FCA, and I use the term betrayal a lot when I talk about the FCA, because they said that my money was protected. They're still saying it. Your money's protected by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, but only if they let you go to it. And in the case of Woodford, they didn't. They lied about the percentage of people that the amount, sorry, that people lost, and persuaded a High Court judge and persuaded the government and the Treasury. And I don't believe that the government and the Treasury believe what the FCA say. I think they know full well that the FCA are full of crap, but they choose to do nothing about it because Starmer and his cohorts have a different agenda. They want people to put their money into financial services. So it suits their agenda to pretend that the FCA are okay and to pretend that things like Woodford do is acceptable. And this goes back to right at the start, Andy making a comment about tolerable harm, right? Tolerable to who? It's not tolerable to me and my wife to lose such a sum of money. It's tolerable to the government because they get to stay in power. So, you know, my thoughts about vulnerability is we're all vulnerable, that was said in the chat. At some point or other, every one of us has been vulnerable and is probably going to be vulnerable again. And the only question is, how do you deal with it? And the only way I can think of is you have to a degree to say, I'm not the wrong one here. I'm not the bad one. This has been done to me, right? But invariably, you feel the guilt, you feel the embarrassment, you feel the shame.
Ian, thank you so much on behalf of all of us for speaking so freely about your situation. Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Thank you. This, as I said earlier, this really is a serious topic, isn't it? It really is a serious topic. Lou's been able to rejoin us, so we'll go back to Lou, and then if you don't mind, we'll go to Steve Conley when Lou's wrapping up to talk about the work that he's been doing, because the question is, what can be done when people have been harmed? What can we do collectively to try to give people some kind of positive way forward? And I know Steve's done some great work on that front. Thanks, Ian, for sharing that. Lou, I think you're back, so we'll jump back to you.
I don't know. My whole internet went down. Like, we went into a vortex. Everybody went very quiet upstairs as well, which was weird. My last point was just around how do we, once we've identified vulnerability, there'll be certain things. So it'll be people, you can quite often tell when people can't understand the information we're trying to provide. So it's about asking and checking. And then just the last bit, which I literally was going to wrap up in a couple of minutes anyway, was around if you suspect that somebody might be situationally or marketplace vulnerable, the best way to address it, and I probably put myself out of business in relation to this, is to ask them what they need. So don't ask them what their vulnerability is. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying why are you vulnerable? What's wrong with you? Like getting them to highlight and out themselves. You're asking people what they need. So for me, I need size 14 font printed paper with extra white spaces because I can't see very well. Bertie needs clear instructions and he doesn't like whistling. But don't put me he's left-handed, so in his student passport it says don't sit me next to a massive right-hander, and I don't like whistling. So it's quite simple. So he's not having to go, well, I'm autistic, because he doesn't like to do that. What he's saying is these are the things I need. So it's the same with all vulnerability, but if we can be proactive in what we can offer, so if that is more time, written communication, verbal communication, phone, video, whatever people need, to be proactive in what we offer, but also be really inclusive in the fact that if we ask people, that's where we'll get the best amount of data and knowledge as well for us to be able to plug all of those other organisational blind spots. And that was it from me.
Fantastic, Lou. As always, fantastic. Can we show our appreciation to Lou? Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of insights on this topic. And you indicated a few things you might be happy to circulate, the slides and other documents. Please get them to us and we'll get them out there. Thank you, Lou. That was absolutely brilliant. We will wrap up at or just before 7:30, folks, but we've got about 20 minutes or so to share other thoughts that we'd like to, building on the excellent ground that Lou has covered. We're going to go to Steve Conley. Steve, please take a moment to introduce yourself and give everybody a bit of a glimpse into your background and talk about the very pioneering work you've been doing with some TTF members. Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andy, and hi, everyone. I've been with the Transparency Task Force for over 10 years now, and before that, I was a very senior person in financial services industry in big corporates. I was head of investments HSBC, head of investments RBS Group. I was chair of a bank assurance steering committee of the British Bankers Association, and I quit because my values didn't align with those of my peers. So I gave up a very high paid job. And I earn about a quarter of what I did ever since. But I campaign for a trustworthy system. So that's why I work with, I support the Transparency Task Force. I'm trying to change the system, but that's a very slow process. So what I did was I set up the Academy of Life Planning, which is a kind of a bottom-up approach to show people how to trust themselves in financial services. I say the best place to find a pair of helping hands you can trust is at the end of your own arms. And so I kind of sit as an expert on your side of the table, on people's side of the table, completely independent of what I see as a rigged system. So I want to kind of level the playing field so that you've got an expert, an insider who's been there, knows all the tricks and everything, who's sat on your side of the table. And I want to offer that for free. So that's what I do. I kind of provide this group. But I've set up this community group called Get Safe, which is get support after financial exploitation. I want it to become a charity. It was an idea Andy and I came up because I've been working with Andy, because the life plan is a big vehicle to get you back on your feet in a very short space of time. And I've been doing that for about 15 years now, helping people get back on their feet commercially, but now I'm doing it for free to the people in need. That's what Get Safe is about, and that hopefully will eventually be a charity. But what we did is we came up with the idea, let's see if it works on people who've been lost significant amounts of money through financial exploitation. And we ran a pilot, and it's basically 6 2-hour sessions every Monday evening. And it was we were all in a very dark, depressed place at the beginning. Apparently, depression is very much where everyone is when they've been after financial exploitation. And but there's Rollo May, I think his name is, a psychologist, who said that the definition of depression is an inability to conceive a future. So it's your inability to think. So you're obsessed with the what's happened and everything. You can't conceive the future. So what I kind of do is create that future plan, a life plan for the future for just a few years from now, getting back where you were with your life and things. So we've kind of got that program, and it worked. There's about half a dozen people. One person was on the call, but they've now dropped off. So I was going to ask them how it gone, but it worked, and people really, and the feedback is amazing from that group. And I did try to run a second cohort, but no one signed up to that, so it's on hold at the moment. So there's that support that I do, but I do some other things as well. What I have found is, yes, after financial exploitation, everyone is vulnerable, extremely vulnerable. And it's very, very difficult for me to come along. I find people are quite cold to me, very suspicious of everyone, even me and Andy and everyone. So we're all suspicious of each other. So it's very difficult to work with people and offer help collectively to people. But what I do find is that one or two people have come along to me and say, well, can you help me? So I've been helping, even though the cohort 2 has not happened, I've been helping one or two individuals on a one-to-one basis. And my focus there is actually recovery. So I'm an expert in recovery, and I help what I call citizen investigators. So that's you. And I show you how to use AI to level the playing field. And so we kind of, so I've got a couple of cases where they've life-changing amounts, lost over £500,000 in life savings, have nothing left, and they're retired. So this is how bad the situation is. And what I do is help them prepare a case file. We've had one case where the FCA have failed to respond to 100 emails. So I'm escalating that, and I'm showing them how to reply and how to write a proper letter to the FCA, how to present evidence, how to escalate it, how to go to the higher up and to the higher up committees and everything. And we got to do it. So we have this AI plan, and at the moment I'm helping just a handful of people who, and they've given up. They've been trying to recover their money for 10, 15 years. And the FCA, FOS, the police, Serious Fraud Office, all stonewalled them, and they told them to extent, stop being a nuisance, stop writing to us, we're going to ignore your emails. This is people who lost their life savings to criminals. And so I'm showing them on the AI recovery. I'm also very vocal on social media. So I'm embarrassing the FCA, I'm embarrassing HMRC, I'm embarrassing, because I'm quite big. I have about over 500,000 impressions on my LinkedIn because I'm putting all these articles out there, just making a big noise and embarrassing people with factual cases that an AI helps me to do that. What I do with the AI, I'm showing the citizen investigators how to use it. I'm teaching. We run free class, citizen investigators, how to use AI to fight your case, to get the FCA to listen. If they don't listen, what to do, to get your MP to listen, and if the MP doesn't listen, what to do. And then we've got these strategies going, a big evidence file using Google Drive and everything. I just show you how to use all the tech to level the playing field and get your advantage. So I'm on the consumer advert on the consumer side of the table, offering this is Get Safe for free. So if any of you, honestly, you want help with this, and the other people who I'm helping will help you as well, because it's like a community of people helping each other, peer community. So just to remind you, Rebuild Workshop is about a life plan to get back on track to you, and it helps you build your money as well as your life, not by investing, but by earning. It's called human capital strategies. Recovering through AI against the rigs, evening things up against the rig system. Advocacy AI has to get big noise out on social media and say the right things on a community. So that's Get Safe, and that's what I'm doing, Andy.
Fantastic. We thank Lou for her work and her contribution tonight. Can I please invite everyone to also thank Steve, because he's doing this literally on a voluntary basis with no cost, no small print, no commercial agenda, just a sense of purpose and sense of knowing he can help people. He definitely can. Thank you, Steve, very much. We'll go to, I'd like to invite Mr. Mark Bannister to elaborate on the point you put in the chat. I don't know if you saw my note, Mark, but you put something in the chat about Feel Better, Live More by Dr. Ranjan Chatterjee. Would you be happy to tell us a bit more about that, please, Mark? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Lou, thank you very much for your interesting chat. And the reason that I put this in the chat for you all to look at is I listen each week, or I try to Dr. Rajan Chatterjee's podcast, and he usually puts out two each week, one a long format one, and usually a short format one, which is elements of a prior episode. And last week's was particularly interesting to me because it was entitled How to Gain Control Over Your Mind, the Healing Power of Discomfort and the True Essence of Happiness. And I think, along with many of his interviews, it's extremely illustrative and interesting. And it struck a chord with much of what Lou was saying. And that's why I thought it worthy of perhaps bringing to your attention.
I just found it online there, Mark, and I just put a link to it in the chat. Thank you so much. That definitely looked like something worth following up, Mark. Much appreciated. I know Mark Bannister well, folks. If Mark spends time on something, it's worth spending time on it. Believe you me. We've got Lynn Parsons and Gordon Crosthwaite here with us, who are members of the Phillips Trust Action Group. Lynn and/or Gordon, please feel free to talk about the insights you've got over the last couple of years, getting to know many elderly victims of financial detriment due to that building society situation we spoke about earlier. Lynn, perhaps you'd like to just spend a few moments just talking generally about what it's been like for some of these vulnerable elderly people to realise that the organisations they spent literally decades, maybe 50, 60, 70 years getting to know, let them down very badly. Lynn, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, Gordon and I have heard story after story of people who fit the profile of everybody we've been discussing. They were essentially targeted by their own building societies. They were all over 60, they were newly widowed, they had no mortgages, they had savings in their building society accounts, and they were targeted and pushed towards a group of unregulated companies who were trading illegally. And the building societies received a commission for this. But all the same, the building societies are denying any responsibility. And as we've escalated to the FCA, the FOS, the SRA, etc., what we seem to find at first is that these organisations will have someone communicate with us and it all looks very positive, they're on our side. And then all of a sudden, everything gets shut down. So we're in the situation that Steve Connolly has just described, where we're being stonewalled. And we are talking about pages and pages of evidence going over years now, 3 years. But we are representing a group of people who now don't have a lot of time to waste. This probably happened to them when they were in their 70s, now 80s and 90s. We're getting no support from all of these regulatory bodies who are supposed to be in their role to support just this type of person. And quite frankly, I'm so personally disgusted still by the fact that these organisations were mutual. They weren't supposed to be like or commercial entities in the usual sense. They're member organisations. And so when we talk about trust, yes, these elderly people were trusting them, but they had a right to trust them. They'd been going in for decades with their passbooks, conducting banking business on a daily basis. They had personal relationships with the people behind the counter. If these people who built up these relationships over 20, 30 years had mortgages these people, with these people were privy to their life events. When things changed, when they were widowed, they were, for example, funneled into financial advisory sessions in the building societies. They were treated and groomed, if you like, in a way that made them trust. And we were understanding that we had protections up to 80,000. this counts for nothing. And these people were betrayed and are still betrayed. And, you know, I feel very strongly that this complex PTSD that we've been discussing applies to this victim group very strongly. And what's worse is because of the age demographic, obviously it's unlikely for many that they'll get a resolution before they die. Unfortunately, we've lost many victims already simply because of that demographic. So, you know, Gordon, Andrea and I are doing what we can. We are using the methods that Steve hinted at, in that we are trying to embarrass the building societies locally within local media and nationally with national newspapers, etc. And whilst we were trying to get them to do anything to us, we were bombarded by social media on a regular basis. So when any of these trite messages came out from the building societies about how wonderful they were and how we could trust them, obviously the victim groups just descended on those posts and, you know, made them look quite stupid and embarrassed them. So that's kind of where we are. That's the nature of the victim group. And I think, you know, what we've discussed tonight is extremely pertinent.
And thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. There's so many of you can relate to what we're discussing. I'm going to invite Paul Weir to chip into the conversation in relation to one particular point that Lynn has just spoken about, this idea that people may not live to see a resolution to the problem. Paul, if you don't mind, could you briefly tell everybody about EMAG and this issue that the problem of equitable life has gone on for so long that literally people are dying before getting the justice that they've been promised? If you don't mind, Paul, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Hi there.
Folks, we'll go back to Lou for any final comments from Lou before we wrap up the session. Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Yes, this has been going on for 25 years. I and a million other people lost a chunk of pension savings. We were victims of a fraud, a £6 billion fraud, with the knowledge of the regulators who were interested in covering it up and protecting us. Eventually, with the aid of the Parliamentary Ombudsman, we finally got to 2010, where the government of the day agreed to pay us 22% of our losses, or what they said were our losses. We're still fighting to get the other 78%. We're now another 15 years on. The government are obviously pleading poverty. I've had recent meetings with various Treasury ministers who've been very sympathetic, keep saying we haven't got any money. So that's sort of ongoing. There is some progress of sorts, at least in the mood music. But in the meantime, as Andy says, I was, when the shit hit the fan, I must have been about 50. Quite a few people were 60, 65. They're now in their mid-80s, late 80s, 90s, or dead. So increasingly, if the government sits in its hands for much longer, hundreds of thousands of people will never get any redress, or sorry, the rest of their redress.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Does anybody have any final comments before we invite Lou to share her final thoughts before we wrap up today's session? Please raise your hand either digitally or physically if you need to. Oh, I think we've got Barry. Barry, please do come in and share your point. Thank you.
Well, I'd really like to commend the work of Steve Conley in what he's doing. I mean, it's been 7 years now since you know, London Capital Finance, Blackmore, and so it goes on. It's a long time. The recovery's been very slow. It does hit really, really deep. And you know, I remember at the time, you know, spending an hour on the phone waiting for Acton Fraud to answer the phone. And eventually when they answered, there was a guy that listened to me for half an hour. And at the end of it all, he said, oh, the computers have gone down. We'll ring you tomorrow. And of course, never did. You know, but it is, you know, my point is, it's difficult to know for victims where to go. And, you know, I'm not sure of the right people to help that, you know, whether we're the right people to extend a helping hand. you know, whether we're in the right place, having gone through, been victims ourselves. But yes, thank you to Steve.
Thank you, Barry, for thanking Steve. It's really nice to hear. Always nice to hear. We are building a very nice community now. There's a lot of goodwill and a lot of genuine caring going on. That may not sound very macho or very 21st century, but there's a lot of people in this community who actually care, really do care. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that. Lou Baxter, back to you. Thanks so much for being the inspiration for tonight's meeting and sharing your thoughts, Lou. You have the floor for a couple of minutes if you want them to share any final thoughts that you'd like to know. Thank you, Lou.
I was just going to say, I think macho's really last year anyway, so we don't need to be macho anymore. No, I was just going to say that this group is really good because there's a real understanding of what it's like to be a victim, obviously, because lots of people on the group have been in that position. So it's about I wanted to say weaponizing, but I mean harmonizing, but using that knowledge as well to ensure that that is used for the future, and actually try to integrate some of that into what would have done. Whilst I'm aware that lots of people are still fighting their cases to get their money back, but what would have looked differently from a victim support perspective? If people have got ideas around that, please email them to me, because I would happily consider that. Even if it's just, I would have liked to have been visited, spoken to, talked to like this, or this didn't work, or this did work, or any of those considerations, because obviously I don't have all the answers. I'd be really interested to hear that. So I appreciate you having me on tonight.
Thank you, Lou. Are you happy for us to share your email address when we do the close event note?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't email back very quickly. I get a lot of email traffic, so don't be offended. It's like a vortex of doom.
Well, Lou's willingness to do that, and being with us, 7:30 on an evening when she's essentially got a 9 to 5 kind of job, is just absolutely fantastic. Can I take the opportunity to thank everybody for being here tonight, talking about a very, very important topic, not an easy topic. It's a sensitive, delicate topic, but I think we've made really good progress improving our understanding of consumer vulnerability and how best to support it. We'll share the slides, we'll share the recording, we'll share the chat, we'll share everything we can. Let's just put our hands together to thank not just Lou, but everybody for participating tonight. Thank you all very much indeed. Lou, time for you to race to get to your game of whatever it was that you were speaking about earlier. Thank you very much.
I need to learn to say no to things is what I need to do.
That's your vulnerability.
Thank you for having me.
I can relate to that. I can relate to that. Thank you all very much indeed. Mark, I'll give you a call in a moment. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers, folks. Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.